Every day was a matter of survival. Living in my car, dealer to dealer. Really just rolling the dice on my life every single day. Basically drinking myself to death. There was a moment in rehab for the second time. Fucking single bed. These beds you only get in rehabilitation centers, man. Head in my hands. What the fuck has got to change? Can't live like this anymore. I had literally died numerous times. And that was the tipping point, bro. That was the precipice. That was my line in the sand moment.
All right, what's going on, everybody? That was one of tonight's guests, Drew Wild. We are also joined by Ryan Hassan. I'm Daniel Unmanageable, and this is Hard Knocks Talks, coming at you from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Treaty Number 6 territory, and the traditional homeland of the Métis people. Let's bring in Drew. Hey, Drew.
Hey, brother. Thank you for having us tonight. Such a pleasure to be here.
How are you doing this evening?
Dude, I'm feeling good. Actually watching that in that moment right then and there, and the way that the cinematic flair that you've applied to that, I actually could feel, some really distinctive emotion bubbling up in me. And just recognition of where I was to where I am now. It's really powerful to see it in the way that you've curated it, bro. It's beautiful.
Well, that is a high compliment. Thank you so much. So, having said that, let's bring in Ryan. What's going on, buddy?
Daniel, thanks so much for having us. Very excited to be here from the other side of the planet where it is really, really hot. And I'm excited to have a chat to you today and to all the people watching and or listening.
Thanks for rubbing that in.
I have a serious question about Australia. Do dingoes really eat babies?
Yes.
Yeah,
every
regularly.
Yeah.
It's their only diet, actually.
Oh my God.
Just so you know, our local dingo just had its birthday. It's a bit of an
Happy
inside
birthday,
joke.
local dingo.
Yeah. Anyways, with that, let's go.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
Okay, before we jump in, I just want to let our viewers and listeners know that tonight's live production is premier sponsored by A Line in the Sand, and we are going to learn more all about them in just a little bit. I just want to say that you guys and your organization, Line in the Sand, are Hard Knocks Talks' first international sponsors. This is a landmark episode for us, so we have
humbled, honored, and proud. Thank you for having us.
Likewise. So where to even start? In the intro there, you talked about drinking yourself to death. Usually behavior like that doesn't just crop up from anywhere. Why don't we take a few minutes and take a step back? Why don't you tell us where the drinking all got started? Like, was there drinking growing up in the house?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if I'm being really honest, I would say my first addiction or escape for me was porn. That's where I really recognized that first compulsion of just like, wow, like this is something that takes me out of myself, disconnects me from me. That flowed into weed. I found my dad's stash at a very young age, at about 11 years old. I found my dad had a pretty high-end corporate job. For him, I imagine it was just a stress relief. Helped him unwind, cope, deal, right?
When you were early on, did you see him smoking it and put like a tone of like that was a negative thing he was doing, or was that like just normal life for you?
Not at all. He would very, very, very ever rarely smoke it in front of me. Like I maybe occasionally in the evenings may have smelt it, so I recognized the smell. But definitely, like my parents were both very social. There were always people around at our place on the weekends. There was a lot of drinking in the environment that I grew up in. Just wine was commonplace. And so started smoking weed at 11, not regularly, but that's also not normal to be smoking weed at 11 years old.
So what was it like?
And then,
like, What was it like the first time you tried it? Like, was it a great thing? Did it feel like a warm blanket? Like, I got to do this more,
It really
or
did.
yeah?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I can go straight back there. I remember I was with one of my cousins,
Hmm.
and the parents had left the house that we were staying in at the time. We were on a holiday, and Dad had, when we would holiday, he'd take this little, like, it was like a glasses case, and he had this little like bag of weed and this little pipe.
Hmm.
And so he took, my cousin was maybe a year or two older than me, so he knew what I was doing. I had no fucking clue what I was doing.
Yeah.
And we smoked this pipe, and yeah, I just remember this, like, this euphoria of it, in a sense. This, like, oh, I feel at peace within my body.
Yeah.
I feel still. I feel comfortable. And also, like, the joy and the laughter and the fun and the play that came with that.
Yeah.
But again, that switch flicked really quickly from, like, fun and play to, like, escape and numb.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I guess the drinking started in my early teens.
Mm. Let's
I
let's bring Ryan in here.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. Ryan, so
Yo.
you've also had quite a journey with substances yourself, correct? Tell us a little bit about what it was like for you early on, like how did it get started for you?
Yeah, well, for me, going back and tracing the roots of it, I grew up in a very middle class household, mum and dad there, very loving. Alcohol very normalized in my family and in culture in general. Us Aussies down here, we're known for, like, being big drinkers. That's because it's just such a part of our culture. It's
Hmm.
everywhere, and a lot of people pride themselves on how much they can drink. For me, I noticed that around the age of 10, in primary school, I started to get anxiety in certain situations. I never would have had language for it back then. This is me as an adult, looking back on it. But I started to feel this underlying dread, and it started off in certain situations at school, and then in most social situations, around playing sport. And it was kind of bleeding into my life. And, at home, mum and dad very loving, but there was never a container where we would talk about what we were feeling. I think a lot of families are like this. Everything's very much achievement based. It's
Yeah.
like, how are you doing at school? Are you getting good grades? Are you playing on the football team this weekend? How many goals are you going to get? All of that kind of thing. We never sat down and said, hey, how are you feeling internally? Like, what's happening in here? That was just a conversation that was never had. And so as these feelings of anxiety and fear started to come up, I just bottled them up and internalized them. And for those who are listening who've been through that, they know that doesn't solve the problem. It only compounds it. And so over time, this problem was getting bigger and bigger. And then I found alcohol around the age of 12 or 13. And the culture around that, those teenage years down here, is very much binge drinking on the weekends. And as soon as I drank it, I'm like, this liquid, this substance here will make those feelings of dread and fear and anxiety and awkwardness, it'll make that go away for a short amount of time. Not completely, but maybe 80 or 90%. And even though the next day those feelings would come back, oftentimes with a bit of interest attached, it was those brief moments of reprieve. Keith Richards had a great saying. It's like the contortions that we'll go to just not to be ourselves for a few hours. And it's
Yeah.
like just not wanting to be with that normal state of consciousness that I was in. And so alcohol became a real coping mechanism for me until I found illicit drugs. Ecstasy and speed were kind of the next one. Marijuana I tried, but it didn't solve my problem. It made me more anxious and paranoid. So
Well,
I started a sort of a love
before we
affair.
get too far ahead, let's go back to Drew here for a minute and talk about that. What was it like for you? When did you start to notice that it was going sideways for you? Like, in the moment, like, did it go sideways a lot longer before you realized it, or did you feel it coming on?
Oh no, I felt it coming on. So, like Ryan said, through my teenage years, completely normal. Like, my behavior wasn't any different to the peers that I was keeping around me. That party culture, that drinking culture, particularly orientated around sport. Rugby is massive. I grew up in New Zealand, so it was just sort of like locker room type culture. For me, I had a high school girlfriend. Came back from a year overseas, and we broke up. Quite a toxic breakup after maybe 4 years together, and just went through that absolute immense heartbreak that you do, and with that first love. And again, as Ryan's already sort of touched on, these were feelings that I didn't know how to be with. I didn't know how to hold. I didn't know how to process. I didn't know how to feel. And that's when I put my foot down on the accelerator. It was like, I'm gonna party through this. I'm gonna drink through this. I'm gonna drug through this, and I'm gonna, ultimately sleep with as many women as I possibly can to validate that sense of loss, and that I'm okay, and that I'm still loved. Because that was always my core wound, was that I'm not loved as I am. And that acceleration happened real quick, man. That was like 0 to 100 in probably the space of 12 months. Everybody around me knew that there was a problem. My drinking became extremely abnormal to everybody around me. And they were just waiting. They were just waiting for that. They were the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so it was maybe 21, 22 years old was the first time I ended up in rehab.
So what did your parents have to say? Like, is there anything that they could have said differently that may have steered you in a different direction?
Nah, nothing.
Mhm.
I unfortunately have to have, I have these conversations daily. I have, family members of, partners of reaching out to me every single day asking for advice. How can I help, my loved ones? And because I was in that position, I'm like, unfortunately, there's literally nothing you can do until they want it themselves. You can't, you can't want something for someone more than they want it for themselves. And I knew that it had to come from me. They knew that it had to come from me. They had actually reached out to friends of the family that had gone through similar experiences, and they had distinctly told them, like, hey, like, he's got to put his hand up and he's got to be the one that asks for help. And so I can't even imagine what that must be like for a parent.
Yeah. Ryan, can you relate to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like Drew, I speak to families of people going through addiction, on a daily basis and have for years. For me, I was extremely good at hiding it. So it wasn't until, I would disappear for months at a time that my family would start to pick up that something was going on. I was kind of, the certain conditioning and programming that I had mean that, I could abuse drugs and alcohol, but still function in society, sometimes barely, but, holding down a job, finding a girl, getting married, getting the mortgage, a dog, like all the things that you're supposed to do in this life to equal happiness. I was kind of ticking those off whilst at the same time being inherently unhappy and completely abusing these substances. And not just the substances, like, I had like gym addiction for a while. I'd weigh every gram of food. I'd be poaching my chicken breast, and if it was 251 grams and it was meant to be 250, I'd like cut a bit off and take the gram off. Like, such obsessive behavior, which is plays into addictions. People think that addiction's just drugs and alcohol, and we have a certain avatar in our mind of the addict, but my God, it touches all of us in some way more than we like to admit.
Man, the first 2 years of my recovery, I was built like a god. Like I was, you know what I mean too. Like but hey, it was a good path for me to go. I would go to the gym and I would just murder myself like in the gym. And you know what? I'd leave the gym and I'd feel better, So that's what I needed at the time. But was I addicted to it? You damn straight I was. Yeah, I was 100%.
Yeah, and I mean, as long as that's a stepping stone, it's like there's nothing wrong with, like, being able to step out of a really dangerous thing like, methamphetamine and GHB addiction for me, and get obsessed with working out. But I think as long as that's a stepping stone, because in the long run, as long as we're, working out or, achieving something in a career sense, and it's trying to make up for some sort of deficiency around us as a human being, we're still going to really have those addict kind of claws in us. So it's like, there's nothing wrong, I think, with stepping into a better addiction. But ideally, when I work with a lot of clients, it's like, how can we free ourselves from the idea that we always have to fill up some void or some hole that we have deep within our heart?
And it's for me, like, I talked to a doctor in addictions medicine some time ago. He was on the show. His name was Rob Tenge. And he said, I asked him, I'm like, what is the best treatment for addiction that you've seen? And he said, Dan, the best treatment that I've seen to treat substance use challenges is to find a way to live a fulfilling life. So I think everybody has a void to fill, right? It's just what we choose to fill it with, and how we regulate that, filling it and finding that work-life balance or that whatever, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like I look at things in kind of, past, present, and future. When I look at addiction, it's like, yes, we do want to create a fulfilling life, but what I've seen with so many people is we're not going to be able to create a fulfilling life until I deal with my past and all the self-sabotage that I do and all the reasons I hold myself back. Because so many of us as humans, we feel this deficiency and we feel like we don't deserve to be happy. I don't deserve to be in that emotional state. I don't deserve to be worthy of love. No one can love me. So we can say, yes, I want a fulfilling life and write on a bit of paper, our vision and our affirmations, and this is who I want to be in my life. But until we deal with the past where we've been programmed to feel not worthy, not good enough, and unlovable, it's very hard to create that fulfilling life. So that's why I try and teach people, let's deal with the past first. Who told you that you weren't lovable or not worthy? Let's, wrap that up. Let's deal with the present, which is like, what's our environment like? Who are the people I'm hanging out with? Is my environment conducive to me living a great life? And then all of a sudden from there, it's like, well, now who do I want to be? Because addiction itself leaves like this gaping hole, like my whole days, I tell people it was a simple life, but not an easy life. I bought, sell, and used drugs. That's all I did every day. So it's simple. But now when that's gone, it's like, well, who do I want to be and what's my life going to be? And that can cause anxiety in of itself for people, but it's also can be very exciting when we choose to have a fulfilling life.
Drew, what did it for you? What brought you into recovery?
Ooh.
I don't remember.
I mean, I think, bro, I think it was really that moment that I shared with you earlier. That's just like that choose your hard. Choose your hard. The life that I had created for myself was hard. Like Ryan just said, it was simple, but it was killing me. And it was one track and one track only. I knew, and familiar, and actually felt safe, if I'm being really honest with you, because that was all I knew. That was all I knew. So anything outside of that felt like a threat, a challenge. That it actually felt like death. Anything other than what I knew that had kept me alive up to that point felt like this threat. And so I really had to, unfortunately, get to that place where that other path, this path of this journey of recovery, of healing, of whatever you want to call it, surely that can't be harder than what I had already created for myself. And so, like I sort of was saying, that was that moment where it's like, right, what haven't I done? The only thing I haven't done was actually go and do all of the things that people had ever suggested to me. Go and work on me. Go and take a look in here. And I always had questions. Like my question that was so prominent from the first day I walked into rehab at 22 years old was why? And no one could answer that question for me. At that point in time, no one was pointing me in the direction that I'd found today. And this is why I'm so grateful for the work that I get to do today, is that I can understand the why. And this is Gabor Mate is one of, a huge inspiration for both Ryan and I. And, he talks about often, it's not why the addiction, but why the pain, why the hurt. Yeah. And when I could start to piece these bits together along my journey, everything started to make sense.
So
and I had a reference point.
What was the difference? So you went to treatment early on, and then quite some time passed, you went back out. What was different the second time you went back? What flipped the switch from why the addiction to why the pain? Do you remember the day?
Bro, I was just done. I don't have a clear answer for that. Mm-hmm. Something just within me, just that, like you just said, the switch flicked. Yeah. It's like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I've got two choices: live or die. Mm-hmm. If I carry on the way I am and have been, I will die.
You think rock bottom is a necessity?
Live and thrive.
You think rock bottom is a necessity? Do you think people can recover before they hit rock bottom?
I think a form of a rock bottom is necessary. Does somebody have to get to the point that I did? Definitely not. Definitely not.
Can I jump in about rock bottom?
At that point, definitely. Please.
Yeah, I think we have this idea of rock bottom as a singular moment in someone's life when, from what I've seen, I had about 36 rock bottoms, and so many people I've spoken with will have them. And it's like, there's this moment where we're like, holy crap, I can't believe my life has become this unmanageable and all over the shop. Now, that's an opportunity to wake up, to reach out, to have a willingness to engage with treatment, to be open to whatever that treatment is and dealing with your own bullshit to an extent. But if we don't get that wake up call, then we're going to have another rock bottom, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months down the track, but we'll have another one. And that's another chance to wake up. If we don't get it, we'll have another one. And that's why people, and I had it myself so many times, I thought, oh my God, my life can't get any worse than this. And I didn't wake up and willing to engage. And then like a few weeks later, oh no, it's way worse now.
Ta-da.
And that would just keep happening. Yeah, surprise.
Yeah.
So what was
100%.
it?
Yeah, like that was just my last rock bottom. Like there
Yeah.
would have been thousands before that.
And what was yours, Ryan? What brought you into recovery?
Yeah, similar. I think luck plays a big part. Grace, we like to call it. You know, I was at a point where my life was a mess, where I'd just been arrested. I was on serious criminal charges. I was overdosing on GHB, one of them at the wheel of my car on a freeway. I'm like, I'm literally going to end up in jail forever or dead. And that's kind of the fork in the road a lot of people in drug addiction and drug dealing come to. And so I'm like, I'm going to try and get help. And I was just lucky enough to end up in the right person's office at the right time, where I was open and willing. They had a message for me. You know, I went into her office and she said, look, because I thought addiction was my issue. I'm like, look, drugs and alcohol are my problem. And she said, no, they're not.
No, they're your solution.
She said, she showed me a list of these emotions and said, you've spent 30 years not being able to feel or process guilt, shame, anger, fear, sadness, hurt, and you've just accumulated so much. It's like having a backpack that's so heavy, it just weighs you down. And all I wanted to do was feel good. I wanted to feel up. I wanted to feel joy, you know? And so when I wasn't using drugs, all of those suppressed emotions that I hadn't dealt with throughout a lifetime would just be so active within my system that natural human instinct, I need to search externally, like what can make this feeling go away and make me feel good again. She goes, look, if we can deal with all those feelings and emotions that you've got riddled within your system, then the byproduct of that is you no longer need to escape from who you are as a sober human being, which means you don't need to reach for drugs, alcohol, gym, women, whatever it is. And for some reason, I just went, I can't argue with that. That seems exactly right with my situation. So I was open. And so, you know, I delved into a lot of my past and the emotions that I hadn't dealt with. And, you know, for me, it happened quite quickly. But, you know, whether it happens quickly or it takes a long time, I think persistence is the key. It's like anything in life. If we persist at it long enough and we're dedicated to wanting a different life from ourselves, then we will do it eventually.
Yeah. So Drew, tell us about your first year in recovery.
Dude, first year was just laying the foundational principles of what it meant to look after me, what it meant to look after myself, what it meant to actually build a relationship with myself. I remember a mentor in my life once looked at me and said, you know, Drew, you need to start being kinder to yourself. And it went straight over my fucking head. I was like, what do you mean? Be kind to myself? How's that going to serve me? Because that internal dialogue, that internal bully was so present and domineering. And like that was what I believed to be, you know, who I was. And the only way I could get anywhere was to beat myself up and push myself into places that I didn't necessarily want to be. And so it started with, you know, again, like you said, just looking after me, you know, eating right, exercising, surrounding myself with different people, having different conversations, you know, really, really, really deeply overhauling my entire environment, and cutting out anything that didn't serve me. But you know, in those early phases, it really was just building a much deeper relationship and loving relationship with myself. And it was, you know, maybe a year in, then it was like, cool, what's next? What else is there? Because there's something more to this.
Was there any pinnacle moments for you in your first year where something clicked and it made sense and it made life a little easier?
Yeah, 100%. It was that was always that question of why. No one has still been able to answer that question for me. And it was when I started to get introduced to people's work like Gabor Mate. Actually, even someone sent me like Ryan's page at the time, Center for Healing, and found someone speaking a language that I resonated with. That was like, hey, like let's take a deeper look and let's start to recognize the fact that this addiction is merely a symptom, that the thing isn't the thing. You know, this is sort of the core and the crux of you know, everything that we've created around line in the sand is that like the thing isn't the thing. Whatever that addiction is, that coping mechanism, that vice, is simply that. It's just a symptom of a deeper rooted issue and problem. And when I could start to see it as such, it really gave me a direction. It gave me more hope. It gave me a level of healing to which I never had been exposed to before. And I was like, holy shit, like this is the pathway. Like, why is no one talking about this? Why is no one talking or approaching addiction or recovery through this lens? And that's where this passion started and evolved from, to start to recognize that. And on a personal level, actually, bro, it was starting to feel and process the emotion of the death of my dad. My dad died 6 or 7 years ago when I was still in active addiction. And so again, like this, you know, big traumatic event in my life that I had never grieved in any way, shape, or form. And so I had this experience where I was in a facilitated practice with one of my teachers, and it cracked me open. And all of a sudden, I was bawling my eyes out. And he's like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Holy shit!" I'm like, "This is the first time I've actually felt this like undigested life experience of the past, of the death of my dad, and I can feel this energy leaving my body, and I could feel the freedom and the peace and the surrender on the other side of that." And I was like, this is the secret to fucking everything. It's in my ability to feel and process my emotions.
Got a comment coming in here from Mikey B. It's a great comment, Mikey. Thank you for being here tonight. Mikey says, loving yourself is one of the most important things to do. Long comment short, it's hard to work on something you hate. So learn to love yourself along with the flaws so you have the respect for yourself to fix them.
Preach.
Amen.
The truth is, the undertone of so much of what I take a lot of my own clients through is actually self-love, and its core is self-love. And I recommend to anyone listening a book that I love, and I refer a lot of people to as a beautiful book. It's an easy read. It's called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. And it's written in a way that's super digestible. It's a short read and it's very practical. Really cool book for anyone that might be interested in.
You know, it's interesting that Mike said that, like that. You can't work on something you hate. And there's a saying, you know who Gary Vee is? Gary Vee? Yeah. He says this thing, he's like, stop doing things you hate, you know, and like, and I've learned to sort of incorporate that into my life. Like, you know, like chase your dreams basically is what that means to me. So Mike, when you mentioned that really resonated with me. You know, it's hard to work on something you hate, and that's a fact.
I think self-love can have a bit of a distorted view, and especially I work with both men and women, but women seem to run with that like term of self-love. They just go with it. They really embrace it. For men, it's like there can be a bit of resistance to this concept of loving oneself, and I think there's this framework or this ideology of like, you know, it's just this fucking, you know, it's bubble baths and pedicures, and
like topical things
and chocolate cake, and of course, and you know, at its crux, what I've learned and what I know to be true for myself is that like true self-love is actually like listening, deep listening and reverence and honoring of my truth, like connection to that internal guidance system that's always leading me in the right direction. And when I can listen and act from that place, and the action that I take from that place, like that's the self-care. And I always say, like, when we listen, that will almost always gives you what you need and never what you actually want.
Donna wants to chime in here.
I just wanted to add that, like, in terms of self-love, when I was early in recovery, I came across like a meditation. You guys might know the name Jason Stevenson. And he was talking about the importance, like how we extend compassion and empathy for others, but rarely do we extend that to ourselves. And, you know, like we're often dealing with a lot of guilt, shame, this sort of a thing. And if we can turn that empathy and compassion towards ourselves, we're able to find that pathway to self-love a little bit easier.
The lens of compassion is sort of at like one of the cornerstones of what Ryan and I are trying to bring into this space. It's like when we can start to see, recognize, and acknowledge where and why these symptoms have turned up in our life, then we can hold such a deeper level of understanding and compassion and care for ourselves, rather than the default, which is that deeply embedded feeling of shame and guilt and remorse.
You know, this reminds me of a reoccurring thought that I've had throughout my recovery, and I still have a really messy house, but I've often no, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. I should say the house would be really messy if it was up to me. But what it is like, why is it okay for me to have a messy house? But as soon as someone wants to come over, I'm embarrassed. Like, it's not okay for them to experience my messy house. I have to clean it for them, but for myself, you know what I mean? And maybe you guys can relate. Like, what do you have to say about that?
Well, it's kind of like, who am I when no one's watching? You know,
That's
it's so
right.
funny that
Yes.
we have a cleaner, and when we first got our cleaner, myself and my partner started cleaning the house before the cleaner came over. I'm like, what the fuck are we doing here?
That is totally something I would do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really odd. So, just what you said, Donna, about the compassion thing. It's one thing I would take clients through is the metta prayer. It's a Buddhist prayer of compassion. You know, may all beings be free, may all beings awaken to the true light of their nature, and so on. And it was so interesting watching people. You'd start off with something really easy. So, you know, let's say it's your pet, your dog or something. So hold them in your mind's eye and prayer, and you kind of feel with compassion and love. It's really easy. And then you think of your partner or a really close friend, and then it was just really easy and they'd feel all nice. Then it's like, hold a picture of yourself or look in the mirror and say the metta prayer. And you would watch people squirm, not be able to physically look at themselves in the mirror, have to keep averting their eyes. And we're so conditioned to not be proud of ourselves, passionate towards ourselves, and put it's like everybody else is okay to be happy and be free, but not me. And that's
Ryan,
what
hang on
people
a
with
sec. Hang
addiction
on a
struggle
sec.
with so much.
Did someone in your house just start using the internet or something?
Possibly.
Because you went like really like like it's it's better now. Now that we've brought awareness to it, it's better. Your nerves
It hurt.
have
Look at
yeah,
that. What a beautiful metaphor. As soon as we bring awareness to it, things
yeah,
shift.
yeah, beautiful.
Changes.
Yeah. So, okay, how did you all meet? Like what brought you guys together?
Uh, someone sent me Ryan's Instagram. I don't know. It must have been at least a year before we even connected. I was doing a retreat with Gabor Mate at the time, an online retreat, and for whatever reason, it just so happened to coincide with our first. I think we just jumped on a Zoom. Hey, Ryan, and we spoke the same language, and we revived each other. But it wasn't for maybe a year after that, um, when I had my own practice up and running and was running a lot of group programs. I would bring in guest coaches, and I don't think it was until maybe my second to last version of my group program started as Better Than Your Bullshit and evolved into Line in the Sand. So that's like Line in the Sand 1.0. And so I invited Ryan and his business partner at the time, Matt, to come in as a guest speaker. And they just started just blowing everybody's mind. Matt and Ryan have a very incredible way to articulate what can be quite comprehensive and somewhat, I would say, difficult to digest some of the information sometimes, depending on how it's presented. Matt and Ryan articulate this so beautifully and easily. And I could see the light bulbs just going off on everybody on the call, everyone in this group's face. It's like, holy shit, who
So
are these dudes? And
how long were you in recovery before you started helping other people?
I'd say 3 or 4 years.
And what did that look like for you?
Yes.
Like, how did you come to do that?
Man, I was surrounded by a community of people doing things a little bit differently. I've surrounded by entrepreneurs, I was surrounded by coaches, I was surrounded by mentors, I was surrounded by people just already in that space. So I was really grateful to have a lot of people around me, like just already doing the thing. And I had a business at the time. It was sort of health and wellness orientated, but I had this yearning inside of me, this calling that was just like, I just call it the universe was like screaming at me, bro, like, this isn't your story. I'd told my story 100 times, but it was my health story. It was my weight loss journey story. I'd never actually told my journey of addiction, my experience of addiction.
Mhm.
And it just started with one live, man. I had a mentor challenge me to share my story on a live. He's like, bro, you know what? You're actually robbing everybody of the opportunity to experience like what you've experienced and how you've come out the other side.
Mhm.
For you to share this is going to change the lives of so many others. And it started with one live.
How
And
did you
there might
feel?
have been, dude, I was shitting myself. Absolutely shitting myself.
But like
It
after
was
it was done
probably, I
though,
found it, oh, dude,
like did you kick the shit
I'd
out of
say the
yourself? Like, oh,
live
I
was
wish I would
like,
have said this or I wish I would have said that. Did you?
nah, I didn't actually. It was probably 12 minutes long, and there was probably 12 people that watched it, but it felt like the entire world had watched and
Of
witnessed me.
course. Of course.
And so it was actually the most liberating experience of my entire life.
Mhm.
It was like, whoa, here I am, raw, honest, just in like, as vulnerable as I possibly could be at that moment in time.
Mhm.
And it just snowballed. It was like, this is my purpose. This is what I'm here to do, share and change.
Mhm.
On this planet, and it's just skyrocketed from there, man. It's probably been another 4 years since,
Yeah.
and so after this guest call with Matt and Ryan, we jumped on a Zoom. I basically shared with them my grand vision and where I wanted to see Line in the Sand go to and evolve into, and here we are.
Mm. So Ryan, Drew mentioned earlier undigested life experiences. Now, what does that mean?
Well, it's a term that we use for trauma, basically. So the way that we view trauma is that it's part of the human condition. We all experience some form of trauma, and we sit on a spectrum as to how much we accumulate and how susceptible we are to that. Trauma is a bit of a buzzword now, and I hear it a lot. And people hear the word and kind of get a little bit put off and go, "Nah, that's not me. It's overused." So we use terms like undigested life experience, and I kind of like that, but it's because it's an experience that we go through that doesn't metabolize, it doesn't get all the way through us. It gets stuck, and they can be overt events like when people hear the word trauma, they think, well, a veteran who's been away at war, someone who's had sexual or physical abuse, a car crash, and they definitely are those things. But, developmental trauma is really a symptom of Western culture, being separated from our parents at very young, going to childcare, having a father who tells us we're useless a bunch of times growing up, bullying at school, all of these things. And basically, what it means is our system, the event comes in, or the series of events comes into us, into our consciousness, and it doesn't get all the way through because our nervous system wants to make us aware of a potentially similar event happening in the future. So part of us remains hyper vigilant and overly aware of some other threat that's going to come from around the corner. Now, we don't just have one of these things going on as human beings, we've got a whole bunch. And so as we accumulate these undigested life experiences, we kind of end up in hypervigilance and overly alert all the time. And it's not until we can go back and this is one of the beautiful things, just because an imprint got stored within us when we were 5, 10, 15, 20, however long ago, we can always go back as the person we are today, oftentimes with a professional in a resource state, and start to metabolize and digest these experiences. Because in these moments, part of us splits off. Okay, I call it an orphaned part. And this orphaned part is what's keeping a lookout around every corner for, another male figure to yell at me, or another a woman to emotionally abuse me, or whatever the event was. And so by going back and digesting these, we let these orphan parts know, hey, it's okay now. We don't have to be on the lookout 24/7. We're safe, and we can start to integrate them back into us. And that process is so vital in recovering from addiction, because like I spoke about earlier, like these substances and behaviors we use are all an attempt to help all these orphaned parts quieten down and calm down for a period of time. Whereas if we can start to do that naturally, then that compulsion to escape, which is inside all human beings, that can start to come down. Okay, and when that comes down to a certain point, then all of a sudden we say, holy crap, this is a situation where I would have absolutely needed to reach for a drink or for food or for a drug. And we realize, hey, I don't need to reach for it for whatever reason. And this is like true progress on the journey. We're working at the root, as the Buddhists would say, instead of playing around on the surface and saying, well, how do I just remove myself from the behavior or the substance? Instead, we're saying, let's get to the root. So even that substance, because alcohol is a big one, right? I mean, alcoholics, it's not like, I don't go to family Christmas and everyone's smoking meth and I have to try and avoid not doing it, but my family are drinking,
I mean,
right? Some families might
I
do
have
that. I'm
had
not sure.
Christmases like that. I have. Not with my family, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like it happens. So
Yeah. And so things like that, alcohol, I've worked with so many people over the years who have a really bad relationship with food, and so eating disorders, it's massive in the world at the minute. And it's like we can't stay away from food or shelter ourselves from alcohol. So when we work at the root, we can live a life where these things can be around. It's okay for them to be around and for other people to use them in certain ways. But me as an individual, I don't need to have that bad relationship with that substance, because that's what it all comes down to. There's nothing wrong with heroin or meth or alcohol or food. There's nothing inherently wrong with these inanimate objects, but our dysfunctional relationship with it is where the issue comes in. 80 to 90% of people who start using a drug or alcohol won't become addicted or dependent. It's those 10 or 20% that do. Those are the ones that are susceptible. So there's nothing inherently wrong with the substance. So a lot of the work that me and Drew do is like, let's understand why. Makes me remember this one lady who came into our center once, and she'd been in the system dealing with addiction and alcoholism for over 20 years. And after a 15-minute chat, she started like bawling her eyes out. And I'm like, is everything okay? And she goes, over 20 years of speaking to hundreds of different people in treatment, no one's ever asked me why. And I'm like, fucking hell, what an indictment on the way that we view addiction and treat it as a society, that no one's asking, hey, why is it that you need to escape so much?
Mm-hmm. So, Drew, what are some strategies? So, say you have a client come in, and they want to work through some trauma, and they have, as you say, a lot of undigested emotions, undigested experiences. What are some strategies that you use to sort of like crack that shell and to help them start seeing things a little differently?
I mean, it's a process, and I think we've got to lay the foundational principles first and foremost, which really just starts with ultimately safety and nervous system regulation. So creating a sense of safety in the self first, and learning and implementing these tools that help us just cope with life on a day-to-day basis. Let's start there before we start really, tipping over the big rocks and looking underneath those. So just foundational principles and practices that really help us learn to regulate our own nervous system. And, that can be as simple as, a basic morning routine.
Make your
There's
bed.
all sorts of different, yeah, make your bed. There's all sorts of different sort of nervous system regulation type techniques. Just a beautiful example that was coming through when Ryan was sharing what he was sharing. Like a client literally just messaged me this morning, and she said, "Hey, like I was freaking out last night. Two dudes were tried to jump over my fence, and she still had no idea why, and doesn't know why they were trying to ultimately get into her property. But she went into ultimate survival response, as we do. If you've got two strange men trying to jump over your fence, she's a single mum. She lives with two kids. She went into protector and survival response, and she recognized really quickly, hey, like I'm in a survival response, and I want to downregulate the nervous system. What do I know that I can do to implement that? And so she went through a really simple practice. She used this language, right? I wanted to close the loop. This is the loop that Ryan's talking about. Wanted to close the loop. So survival response. She saw that, recognized that, wanted to close the loop. A simple practice that I love, Ryan laughs, that I talk about all the time, is literally just hanging your legs up over a chair or the edge of your bed at a right angle. Fastest way to move your body from a sympathetic state into a parasympathetic state. So from fight and flight
So
into
hang on
rest
a
and
sec.
digest.
Oh, you just explained it. I was gonna say, can you explain those terms? And then you went and did it.
Yeah. So fight and flight into rest and digest. And then she put on. We've got a meditation that we create. It's just called resourcing. And so resourcing is just about finding that safe space in the body, that place of safety, that resource within ourselves. And that's different for everybody. Some people can connect to the sensation. Some people would connect to maybe a memory, or it could be just completely imagined space. But with a combination of those two practices, all of a sudden she came back and messaged me and was like, hey, I feel amazing. Like I'm really good. I can be present to what happened, but I'm not caught up in what happened because I processed the emotional response of what happened. And so that's just an example of like arming yourself with the tools in the toolbox to respond differently to how life may present itself. Life is always going to fucking life. Life throws curveballs.
Life is gonna
Shit
life.
happens. Exactly. Life
Life's
is
gonna
gonna life,
life.
man.
That's a meme
The
right there,
t-shirt.
brother.
Life is gonna keep lifing, but it's how we, ultimately respond over react. And that's that overriding those survival responses.
Mm-hmm.
And that if we don't have other tools in the toolbox, that survival response will win 999 times out of 1,000.
Mm-hmm. Ryan.
And then we create new neurological pathways. Sorry, Daniel, but what we do
No.
in that instance, it's so important because it's like with these, what we're doing is we're trying to create awareness around our behaviors and the way that we react in the world. And so they're mostly automatic for most people struggling with addiction. And the first step, you can't change anything you're not aware of. So you become aware of, every time I feel any element of stress in my system, I reach. And then everyone's vice is different, right? Food, gambling, alcohol, Valium, whatever it is. And so then every time that, like Drew's client did, I'm sure the natural reaction is to reach for something or someone to try and make those survival response feelings go away. But then when she uses tools and manages that herself, she gives her subconscious a different message and a different neural pathway that says, I got through that without the external reach. So I'm building my own resilience within myself. And so every time we do that, we call it growing in capacity. Our capacity to be with ourselves in certain emotional states grows and grows and grows, which means that we can tolerate more of life's circumstances. So, maybe it starts off like, hey, I can tolerate someone cutting me off in traffic without losing my shit and swearing at them and beeping the horn. Now I can deal, but I can't deal with an argument with my spouse. But then all of a sudden I grow in capacity. I can deal with an argument with my spouse, but I now can't deal with criticism from my boss. But I keep growing in capacity. Now I can deal with the criticism with my boss. Till we get to a point where our capacity is so big, we can say, fuck, I can deal with anything. Doesn't matter what gets thrown at me now, I can deal with it. And that is such a powerful orientation to have. But it takes this, resilience and growing in capacity till we get to that state where we know the reaching is not going to work, but now we can actually not reach. Early on, a lot of the time, it's like, I know this isn't going to work long term for me, but I still can't stop. But like Drew's client did, she's built that bit of capacity within herself that is going to only strengthen if she continues that over time.
Just want to take a quick break here and let tonight's viewers and listeners know that tonight's live production is also brought to you in part by Prairie Harm Reduction in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Naranon Groups of Regina, Saskatoon, Swift Current, and Moose Jaw. To learn more about all our sponsors, check out www.hardknockstalks.com. While you're there, pick up a t-shirt because they're amazing. So you guys are developing a virtual program, correct? With Line in the Sand?
Yeah.
Tell us about that and tell us how are you going to manage, like, is there going to be anything that's inherently different about your online approach than there would be through your in-person approach?
Yeah. Drew, I'll get you to explain the program a bit, but I saw heard one of your sponsors is harm reduction, and it just triggered a memory for me. And I'm a massive proponent of harm reduction. And I think that we should be having more mature conversations about this, because down here in Australia, I don't know what it's like up there, but so many people down here who claim to be sensible and logical, as soon as you talk about harm minimization, they get very illogical and nonsensical, because we're not mature enough to have these conversations. I remember not long after I started my centre, because I was in the major newspaper down here in Melbourne, and I was getting some calls from the other states, on advice. And up in Sydney, they had a big GHB, a batch of it coming out. That there's different chemical derivatives, but they're having a big problem with it, basically. And so a reporter from their main paper called me and said, what advice do you have? Because, I was very educated on GHB. And I spent about 25 minutes talking to them about exactly what the different chemicals are, how people can not overdose on it by knowing this particular batch, how long they should, all this stuff around harm minimization.
Yeah.
And then the paper came out a week later. They had nothing in there from me, and they had the police constable saying, if you have GHB, flush it down the toilet. And I'm like, for God's sake, do you think people are going to just flush their drugs around the toilet?
The dumbest thing,
because they read about...
The dumbest thing you can say to a person who's using drugs is don't do drugs.
There's been many studies done on drug education in schools, and when we use these fear tactics of don't do drugs, they'll fry your brain, it has either no effect or a slightly inverse effect of what it's trying to have, which means people are more likely to do drugs. It's like, how long do we have to have this approach to realize it's crazy?
It didn't help. It didn't stop me at all. Like I couldn't wait. I could not wait.
I was like, oh, this must be great. They're warning me
Yeah.
about it.
It's so good it's illegal.
Well, what happens? What happens though? You get told all these things about how bad they are, and they'll do this to you and do that to you, and so you have that information in the back of your mind. And then I remember going out and taking my first ecstasy tablet, and as soon as I took it, I'm like, oh, that was all full of shit. That drug education, that was absolute rubbish.
Now
This
they're
is literally,
liars.
this is
And now
literally the
we're
best.
rebelling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
What
even
else
though,
can I try?
Yeah.
let's say 70% of their information was actually good and it was about harm reduction, I've thrown that out too, because the other fear stuff has led me to believe that it's all bullshit. So I think we should be having more mature conversations, especially with our children, around drugs. But that's my little rant on that. Drew, talk about our program.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We'll just go all to Drew now. There. Take us home, Drew.
Take us home. Line in the sand. Line in the sand is the culmination of 18 months work with myself, with Matt, with Ryan, to create and curate, in my humble opinion, one of the most transformative and sustainable addiction recovery platforms that exists. We really wanted to cater to the full spectrum of addiction. So I imagine a lot of your viewers is orientated around drugs and alcohol specifically. But this is for anyone that just wants to, like kind of Ryan's touched on, be better than their bullshit. You've got habits, patterns of behavior, vices, coping mechanisms turning up in your life that are blocking you from what you know to be your greatest and highest potential. Then this program is what's going to really move the needle. What else do I have to say to
Hang
that?
on a second. I got something you can unpack. Be better than your bullshit. Unpack that for us.
Be better than your bullshit. I mean, it plays into. It's something I would have loved to have heard. When I was, at that doorway.
Words are powerful.
100%.
Yep.
My bullshit was those loops, those cycles, that hamster wheel. That was the bullshit. Like, oh fuck, this keeps turning up. The symptoms, really. And so it's like, how can we overcome and override what is that symptom that keeps turning up, the bullshit that keeps presenting itself, even though that's not necessarily the core and the crux of the issue, but it's a very clear indication that if I keep ending up in that same spot, that there's something to take a look in and at and start to heal from.
And one of the in one of the weeks in the modules, we talk about this radical honesty that we need to have with ourselves, and that's part of it because for those in recovery or on the path, we might end up with a bit of success and things are going great, but we are experts at bullshitting ourselves and justifying our behaviors, lying to ourselves and saying this is going to be okay, that's going to be okay, when a deeper part of us knows that it's not. And so part of, I think, breaking up with your bullshit is starting to become aware of those voices in the mind that will start to tell you to do certain things or to not do certain things, which are eventually not going to be advantageous on your road to recovery. So I think that honesty is really important. The power of the group in the program, that's not a new thing. Groups have been around forever. Lots of education and talk around these undigested life experiences. And like I spoke about, working at the root, that's kind of the core of what we're doing. Like, why is someone in the situation that they're in, where there's this behavior that they keep doing and it's causing catastrophic results in their life, but they're unable to stop? What are the roots underneath that? Okay, why are we needing to reach externally? So a lot of the education and practical exercises and conversations are going to be based around that, as opposed to just specifically the behavior or substance itself.
Got anything to add to that, Drew?
There's a deeper level of self-inquiry involved. And it's just as poignant for people that are already in recovery and feel as though they want to take their journey to the next level. There's a level of refinement that I think a lot of people in that space take a step into at some point in their journey, just as I did. There's a point where it was like, what's next? What else is there? I feel like there's something a little bit more. This is for them as well.
Cool, man. All right, well, I think we're coming to the end here. Is there anything else that either of you would like to add?
Yeah, just something that popped up earlier. The comment around you can't work on something you hate on and you hate, and people that are struggling with addiction, coping mechanisms, there'll be an element, a part of them that truly hates who they are as a human being, and they might be conscious of that or not. But, you got to understand it's a very natural human instinct and behavior. Let's say if me and Drew are hanging out and Drew is, all of a sudden driving me crazy and I can't stand him. Might happen, Drew. We don't know. I've got options with Drew, right? I can say to Drew, leave my house, or I can leave his house. I can say we're not going to be friends anymore. I can create some distance from Drew. If I inherently hate who I am as a human being, I can't escape me. When I go to sleep, I'm there. When I wake up, I'm there all the bloody time. So how do we deal with that? We need to alter our consciousness to create some separation from ourselves. And that's why we do these behaviors. So when we can start to create a self that we are not hating and trying to escape from, then we can be free. And the idea that we would hate ourselves, I don't believe any human being is inherently hateable or shouldn't be loved, but we pick up these ideas at some point. Somebody told us, somebody made us feel that way, and we took that on and made it an identity around who we are. As soon as we can break that, then we can truly love and accept ourselves, and we can be free.
Cool. Okay, Drew, you got anything to add?
Cool.
The only thing I want to add is just one of my favorite quotes, our favorite quotes, is by Carl Jung. Until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our life, and we'll call it fate. And that's sort of the core of this program is making the unconscious conscious, bringing awareness to that which we didn't realize was running the show.
Where can people find you?
Best place to find us is our website, litrecovery.com, and or our social media online presence at the moment is my own Instagram, which is just at Drew_Wild. Feel free to reach out to me. There's contact links through our website. Feel free to email us if needed, or feel free to anyone to slide into my DMs on Instagram. You're more than welcome. I'm very active in there as well.
Slide into my
Slide in there.
but not in a creepy
Slide
way.
on in. Not in a creepy way.
Well, maybe a little bit.
No, but genuinely, we both really fucking care. That's at the core of what we're doing. We really care. We really do care, and I feel as though that's why I've really partnered with Matt and Ryan. We really give a shit, and we go above and beyond to help and accommodate as many people as we possibly can.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, sharing your journeys with us, laying some wisdom down us, and thank you for the work that you're trying to send out into the world. That's it for now, though. Take care, guys.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
All right, if you're getting something out of what we're doing here, you can find all our audios on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, or live and interactive right here on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch TV. Thanks for watching. Take care.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.